And then after his time, he pulled his iPhone out of his pocket and showed them a photo from the set of Star Wars Episode 7 before the trailer was out, before anyone knew anything about Star Wars Episode 7 at all, other than, you know,
it existed, yeah.
The Lucasfilm people and Bob Iger probably.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, you know, we have a major character in our next Star Wars movie that is essentially a giant robot ball.
Yeah.
Here's a picture of it.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you may be listening, and welcome to Latitude, the 43 North podcast. I am your host, and I've been your host for 99 of these episodes, Nate Benson, Director of Content here at 43 North. And again, like I said, this is episode 99, and I'm thrilled to announce again, because I've announced it a few other places, that episode 100 will be a live edition of the podcast right here at the 43 North space up in the Dig section of the Innovation Center, 640 Ellicott Street, downtown Buffalo. It's going to be happening on Monday, April 29th, 5:30 p.m. It's going to be a great event. We've got Joe Neiman and Dan Magnashevsky, two of the three co-founders from ACV Auctions, 43 North winner from 4 years ago at this point. I don't know how to do math. I haven't had coffee yet. It's early, but you know what? We've got a great episode of the podcast this week. Episode 99, we've got Techstars partner Cody Simms. What's up with Cody? Well, he has done a lot of things for Techstars. I can't do it justice by just introing him because he does a lot better job introing it himself, and he tells some great stories about building startup ecosystems. He was here in Buffalo to teach a workshop to some of the 43 North winners, some of the Launch New York companies, and other startups who are just interested in growing their startup locally. So I'm not going to waste any more time setting this episode up. I'm thrilled to have Cody Simms from Techstars on this podcast, and I hope you enjoy the show. Cody, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much.
For those who don't know you, give us the quick pitch of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Cody Simms. I'm a partner at Techstars. Techstars is the worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed, and my role there is to help manage our overall pool of capital and how that gets deployed across our various investment programs, accelerator programs, and startup alums.
Techstars, which recently announced a program based here in Buffalo, and we'll be announcing Techstars will be announcing the executive director here shortly. So welcome to Buffalo.
Thank you very much.
What are you doing in town today?
Here to give a workshop and work as part of this ecosystem development project we're doing together with Buffalo and 43 North. And the workshop that I give is one that I travel around the country, actually around the world, and give quite often at our various Techstars accelerator programs. It's called Assumptions and Hypotheses Workshop. So it's all about how to rethink how founders should be thinking about their product roadmaps. And I'm a big advocate for actually thinking a lot less about what features you're developing and thinking a lot more about what assumptions or hypotheses you're trying to validate in what time frame.
So stay tuned. We'll be actually talking about that in this podcast. But before we get into that, talk about life prior to Techstars. What were you doing? How did you get into entrepreneurship tech? What was that background like?
Sure. So I grew up in Kansas in the Midwest.
Booming tech scene.
That's right.
Kansas, right?
And and when I was an undergraduate, I decided I wanted to study something I knew nothing about, just as a kid from Kansas, and ended up studying Chinese in college. Lived in China a couple of times, and then when I graduated from college, I for whatever reason I had lived in China a couple of times, but wasn't ready to go fully commit and move to China, and decided I would move to California because I guessed maybe there was more to do with business with China in California than there was in Kansas.
It's the closest to China you can get
without
going there,
yes. Right? And so I moved to San Francisco, tried to get a job using my Chinese language. This is the late 90s. So China wasn't even in the WTO yet. We were on the tail end of the East Asian financial crisis of the mid-90s. And I couldn't find a job using my Chinese. But magically, I fell into the dot-com boom, which I didn't even know was happening.
Sure.
I was living in San Mateo, California. I was the seventh person with some ex-college roommates and friends sleeping on a seventh person in a 2-bedroom apartment, sleeping in a rubber boat with a shower curtain around me. And my roommate's boss's wife ran HR at this little tech startup called Snap.com. And I magically got a job there as what was called at the time an associate producer, which was basically a glorified data entry person that was finding websites and cataloging them into a search engine before, pre-Google, right? Yeah. So before algorithms were the ones crawling the web, it was humans actually finding websites and cataloging them.
How analog.
Exactly. So I did that. That company ended up getting acquired by NBC, and then NBC spun it out and actually had an IPO on the NASDAQ. Stock went up to, $100-something, and then 9 months later, the stock was at like $2 and we all got laid off. Right. So the craziest journey, but that kind of put me into the tech world. And as part of my journey at that company, I moved pretty quickly from that sort of data entry, sort of search engine cataloging into product management. And then I spent the next 15 years of my career in product management at various companies, from New York Times to Sprint to Yahoo to StumbleUpon.
So the burst didn't scare you away. Obviously not, going to school for computer engineering at the time. There was no, coding, so to speak, back in the late 90s. The burst didn't scare you. You still kind of had that flavor for wanting to be in tech, right?
What was really interesting to me after I flirted with leaving it. In fact, I went to grad school thinking maybe I'll go into academia for a little while, and then kind of got sucked back in.
Safer than a Techstars.
Right, exactly. Then kind of got sucked back in. But what was really compelling to me was I realized after my first 3 or 4 years of working, when I had worked at this company that got acquired by NBC, so I had kind of worked in the television industry, and then I worked at Sprint helping build their first mobile ringtone download engine, where I was helping to download ringtones, and I was kind of working in the music industry, kind of.
Right.
And then I worked at the New York Times doing product, and so I was in the newspaper industry, and it dawned on me after like 4 years of working, I had already worked in 3 major media industries in my career. And before the internet existed, that really wasn't possible. Like you went down a very vertical path in your career, and what was cool about the internet is that it allowed me to work horizontally across lots of things and actually apply the product skill sets regardless of what the vertical framework was. And that was interesting to me.
So StumbleUpon. So as I was saying before this podcast started, that brings me back to, college, on, Firefox at the time, and in, having a plugin for that. What was your role at StumbleUpon, and what was that? Because to me, StumbleUpon, I think is a still relevant kind of technology today, and what they were doing back then was ahead of its time, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, what was awesome about StumbleUpon is that it was, helping you find content discovery through the power of the crowd, right? A unique kind of internet phenomenon, but was doing it in a way that wasn't socially driven and wasn't just purely like pure computer driven. It was humans across the web finding interesting things, tagging them and sharing them, and then it would allow you as a consumer to find something that was, compelling to you. The magic of StumbleUpon was every time you push that button, you didn't know what was going to be next, but it could be awesome.
Yeah. And when you're not paying attention in class and just looking at StumbleUpon, like, oh, this is way more interesting than class was.
Yeah, totally.
So hopefully my mom's not listening because I wasn't paying attention in history class. But that's regardless. So how did the whole Techstars thing come about?
Yeah, so Techstars started in 2007 in Boulder, Colorado. Started as a very local initiative, which I think is important in entrepreneurship. It was founded by 4 people, 2 guys named David Cohen and David Brown, who were lifelong co-founders and entrepreneurs. They built 3 companies together now. And then Brad Feld, who's a well-known venture capitalist in Boulder, and Jared Pullis, who was a serial entrepreneur, had built a very large company previously and sold it during the dot-com boom, and today is actually the governor of Colorado. Yeah. So the 4 of them came together and said, hey, we're in this little mountain town of Boulder, Colorado. We want, but we're tired of flying around to the coast to go source deals as angel investors, and we also want to make sure that, we want to live in Boulder, so we want the entrepreneurial ecosystem here to be awesome. And they ended up starting this little accelerator. They invited 10 companies in. Worked well enough that they did it again the next year. It worked well enough that the next year they did it again in Boulder with 10 more companies. And then they also expanded to Boston and did 10 companies there. And the next year they expanded, included Seattle. So by the 5th year or so of Techstars, we were investing in about 30 companies a year across those 3 programs. Today, we run about 50 accelerator programs around the world, which again, still kind of the same model, a 3-month intensive mentorship-driven accelerator program. Each one invites 10 companies in, so 10 times 50, we're investing in about 500 companies per year now through the Techstars footprint. Techstars companies have gone on to be now represent about 5% of all Series A's in the United States. So any company that goes to raise a Series A, roughly 5% of those are Techstars alumni.
That's highly impressive. Of course, I'm sure you're thrilled with that.
It's been a lot of fun to be part of.
So you joined around 2013,
That's right.
I understand. So, you did something really interesting. In LA, Techstars and Walt Disney came together to kind of jumpstart some startups in that space. What was that like? What were those startups rather? Were they entertainment focused? What was that experience like?
Yeah, that's right. So I joined Techstars in 2013. I had been a mentor previously, so I had.
So you knew the crowd.
I knew the kind of the program. I had been spending time with the Techstars network, and then when Techstars was looking to expand to LA, the Davids asked me if I wanted to take on the mantle and run the program there. We were on the cusp of signing a partnership with Disney, which we ended up signing, and we ran for a few years the Disney Accelerator powered by Techstars. And I should note that about probably now 3/4 of our accelerator programs are vertically focused programs that are around a theme that we run together with a partner or set of partners. So I'll talk about the Disney one in a minute, but other ones that we run like that, we run Amazon Alexa's Accelerator in Seattle, all around the voice space. We run Ford's Accelerator program in Detroit. We run accelerator program with Comcast in Philadelphia. We run a large fintech footprint with Barclays Bank in New York, Tel Aviv, and London, et cetera, right? So a number of programs like that. But I came on when we launched the Disney program, and that was only, I think at the time, maybe the third sort of vertical program that we had like that. We had run one or two with Microsoft and Nike previously. And so the theme of that program was all around innovation in the media and entertainment space. We were trying to take a very product and technology focused approach to the kinds of startups we were looking for. So we were not looking for, the next generation of studio or the next generation of, content creator. We really were looking for people who were building product and tech that could transform that industry. Worked really closely with the Disney team. Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, came in and personally mentored our companies, as did all of his direct reports and senior staff. And as well as people from across the entrepreneurial community, serial entrepreneurs, angel investors, et cetera. And we invested for 2 classes with Disney, so 20 companies total that we co-invested in together with them. Probably the most notable to date of the companies that came through there was, if you are a Star Wars fan, you're probably familiar with BB-8. So back then, we, in our first class in 2014, we had the company Sphero come through our accelerator program. And at the time, they made a really fun, robotic ball you could drive with your smartphone, trying to innovate on the future of connected play. And in their mentor meeting with Bob Iger on week 1 of the program, they got to sit down with him, demoed the product to him. And he sat there quietly and patiently and was very gracious. And then after his time, he pulled his iPhone out of his pocket and showed them a photo from the set of Star Wars Episode 7 before the trailer was out, before anyone knew anything about Star Wars Episode 7 at all, other than,
it existed,
the Lucasfilm people and Bob Iger probably. And he said, hey, we have a major character in our next Star Wars movie that is essentially a giant robot ball. Here's a picture of it. Do you think you could build this? And the Sphero guys looked at each other and said, yeah. By that night, they had a working prototype of a Sphero with basically a magnetic head kind of stuck to the top of it. And next thing you know, they had a global licensing deal with Lucasfilm and were shipping BB-8 toys all around the world. So that was a pretty awesome experience.
So a hell of a first week for that
totally.
company in the
Totally.
accelerator. You eventually moved on to executive director of Techstars and had a pretty tremendous deal flow there for a few years running, over 200 investments per year you were averaging, right?
Well, that's just generally across our Techstars system. So today we're doing 500, right? So that was just us as we were growing. But in my role as executive director, I was working as we were really in the midst of a lot of growth and expansion of our accelerator footprint, and was hiring on a lot of our new managing directors and sort of helping and coaching them as they were kind of cutting their teeth as learning what it takes to be a managing director at Techstars, and spent years, as I still do today, flying around and traveling around and visiting our accelerator programs and meeting all of our portfolio companies. So got a chance to meet hundreds and hundreds of startups over the course of a few years, and which again is still part of what I do today in my current role.
Aside from raking up a few 100,000 miles of travel every year, how do you kind of maintain that level of investments year to year? What's involved with that? And is there really a steady pipeline, or are you actively trying to increase that number?
Well, again, so these investments are all coming through our accelerator programs, right? So each program invests in 10 companies. So the magic is figuring out what is the right program in the right city, in the right vertical. And once we get that, then the next step is finding the right managing director who is going to be the right person to go actually make the direct investments in those 10 companies for their program. My role is supporting all of that as that happens today, right? So, there's a lot of magic that goes behind the scenes of being able to do that many investments in that rapid of time. I think we've probably innovated pretty heavily on the really exciting areas of things like legal and finance to be able to, make that many investments. But, at the end of the day, it's all the same formula. It comes back down to team, right? So regardless of what program you're in, at the end of the day, we're really investing in people more so than businesses. We're investing in entrepreneurs who we believe are going to create a great business. And maybe they've taken some baby steps along the way, but any company, when they're still in the thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue per month,
Sure.
they're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Right. So even if you're doing hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue a month, you're still in the big scheme of things, you're still a really little company, and you're still just trying to figure out what that takes. So what we've learned is it's less about where they are today and traction. It's less about what the current product is, and it's much more about who are these people, and are they driven to not just get the business to that level, but are they driven to deal with all the ups and downs and go knock out all the problems that are going to come up to turn this thing into a really big business.
There's so many evangelists and kind of influencers in the startup space. They're always kind of giving free or unwanted advice about, what you should do to either get funding or whatever the case may be. I'm kind of curious on the flip side of that. Especially since you see so many high volume companies in your travels, what are companies doing incorrectly? Are there any common threads kind of across the startup industry that you're seeing arise that, hey, you probably shouldn't be doing this?
Yeah. Common themes, I would say, a few things that I do see is we all tend to, read TechCrunch or read, whatever, PitchBook, or see, the results of a fundraise after it happens.
Right.
And we all tend to get excited about, this company raised this amount of money on this valuation. And what I think people fail to see when they're doing it for the first time is those are all the results, A, of the people who are successful, and B, it's the result after the round happened, after the competitive dynamics happened, after there was market pressure on the round. And so when you're starting a round for the first time, rather than trying to benchmark yourself against those, I think it's much more important to figure out just how you can build momentum in your round. And oftentimes, the biggest mistake I see early stage founders do is trying to think that they should be setting these astronomical valuations that they see getting written up in TechCrunch every day. Yeah. And instead, just let the market set the price. Focus on roughly about how much money you think you have access to reach. Start to make progress toward hitting that goal, and knowing that X, the number you're trying to raise, can always move and change, right? So as the round gets momentum, X can go up. Sure. But if you set X too high, or even worse, you set Y, which is the price, even higher, right? You end up creating pressure on yourself to achieve that goal. Whereas if you set X lower and the market all of a sudden feels interested, and you get multiple parties interested, X can move up. Right, so it's the notion that as a round happens, it actually often does move up, as opposed to starting with what you see in all the trade journals and everything as being kind of the final fundraise that you see all these companies actually achieving at the end of the day.
X company raised $10 million, but really they only were looking for maybe 2.
Yeah, more realistically at seed, it's probably like you see a company that raised 2.5, but maybe they actually only started asking for $1 million. Yeah. Right, and then they got oversubscribed with interest, because if you get one person to commit to $500,000 on $1 million raise, you're a lot closer to $1 million. Whereas if you start asking for 2.5 and you get $500,000 committed on 2.5, you still have a long way to go, and that round is going to take a while to get done.
When you look at startup communities, that are still somewhat in their infancy, like a Buffalo, for example, there's those growing pains that companies or communities 10 years ago had figured out. One of those common threads is, I've talked to folks who've always been given that advice, never leave the money on the table. If someone's offering you money, take it no matter what. What are your thoughts on kind of that thesis, and should young entrepreneurs who are just new to the space, new to this crazy world of startups, is that a theory that they should actually live by? Like, should they leave that money on the table, or should they walk away from deals?
Well, I think you've got to realize when you're taking investment from anyone, you're entering into a fairly long-term relationship with that person, right? Like, realistically, if this company works, it's going to be 7 to 10 years or more, and if it doesn't work, in the next 2 or 3 years, that means the person on the other side of the table is going to be very involved with you as you're dealing with the fact that it doesn't work. Yeah. And there's, in both those scenarios, you do want to make sure that the person that you're engaging with is someone that you're going to want to work with for a very long time, and you're gonna trust them to work with you through the ups and downs. So, in general, yes, if you've got money coming at you and you like the people, I would say that's great. If you have hesitations or questions, you have to make hard decisions as a CEO, right? Am I willing to, like, if this is my only lifeline to saving my company and getting it funded to the level I need, you may not have a lot of options. On the other hand, if you do have a path to bootstrap or do other things, like, you shouldn't necessarily feel forced to take money if you don't feel like you have to, especially if you're not super excited about the person you'd be taking it from.
So shifting gears a little bit into kind of developing your startup, things like that. Why is in your opinion a roadmap completely useless?
So I am a big advocate, less for a product roadmap and more for a learning roadmap, especially at the early stage. So as I said at the beginning, I spent 15 or so years in product, and I have been personally guilty of creating a roadmap that was more about, do the words fit on the page the right way, in terms of having balance from a quarter by quarter perspective, and that they actually fit on the slide, more so than this, are these the right things to build?
Do as I say, not as I do, as my dad always said.
Exactly.
It's like, I'm telling you not to do this, but I do it myself.
I have done it. I have been guilty of doing it. So, to me, it's less about, feels like we'll probably launch a revamped sign-up flow on mobile in Q3 because feels like that's the right thing to do.
It's all loosey-goosey.
Right. And to me, it's more about, by the end of Q2, we want to learn if we're leaking users through our sign-up flow on mobile. Right. So it's putting the marker around what you need to know and by when, as opposed to what you're going to ship. Because if you put the marker around what you're going to ship, it creates a couple of problems. One, it sort of locks you into doing that, even if you eventually figure out that it's not the right thing to do. And it doesn't formally lock you in. Like, any good startup should be agile and should be sort of changing their plans a little bit. But you have set expectations with your team, with your board, with your investors, with anyone who's a stakeholder in your business. And while it's good to readjust when you learn something isn't right, if you're overly setting expectations about things you do and you continue to change it, people are going to start to have a perception of you that your company is wishy-washy and is always changing direction.
Well, the idea of a roadmap, I think, falls more in line probably with hardware. I mean,
that's right.
When I look at the legacy of, I remember being a kid looking at, going to this Comp USA at the time in Syracuse, and you'd see, the new HPs are out, but then you kind of look at like, down the road, well, we know there's going to be a faster HP with a faster disk drive and a bigger hard drive. So it's like everything was cyclical, back then, because the technology was just getting better. So yeah, roadmaps kind of made sense, but in this age where a kid at home with an app can just quickly update it, like that makes no sense, right?
Yeah, even software, like in the late 90s or whatever, when the internet was just starting, most software was still printed on a CD-ROM and purchased at Best Buy or CompUSA or wherever, right? And so you had to actually know what you were going to ship and by when, because it had to get printed onto a disc and put on a truck by a certain date. I mean, that has nothing to do with our industry today, right? So it's less about what am I going to be doing 12 months from now. The one exception to that rule is often in heavy enterprise, when you have to communicate a roadmap to your customers. And I think that the difference there is those should be features that you're already know. You've already done the learning roadmap process around, and you've already validated that they're important features, and then you need to ship them by a certain date so you can communicate that to your customers.
So obviously the learning roadmap, how do startups, especially small teams, look at a team like 10, 20 people, they're all running hard. They're the CEOs, making deals left and right, flying across the country to figure everything out. How do you develop that learning culture while everything else is going on? Because they're like everything else in a startup, so many things kind of get put by the wayside for the core mission of that company.
So I'm a big believer in about once a quarter, a company kind of takes a day and does a planning day, right? And like you actually dedicate your time to do this. And as part of that planning day, you ask yourself the really hard questions about what big assumptions do we have around our business? What are the things that drive our business? What are the things that make our business go? And it could be more narrow than that. Like if you're going to focus on a certain area of your business, like our mobile app or our sign up flow or our pricing model, like whatever it is. And you spend a good chunk of time asking yourself, what do you know and what do you not know about those things? And the what you know, you should be able to pretty clearly start defining features around those because you already know that this is important. But the what do you not know, like what are the assumptions you have? If you're already designing features around those assumptions, you're building your entire product on a house of cards because you haven't proven that those assumptions are actually right. I do believe that there is a lot of value in hypothesis creation. So a great entrepreneur has to have an opinion, has to have a starting point. They have to say, I think this is the direction, right? That's the visionary part of being a founder. Sure. I think this is the direction. But then I've seen way too many founders do that and then just go start building, as opposed to I think this is the direction. Let's go prove this in one way, shape, or form somehow. Through user testing, through user interviews, through some lightweight prototyping, through some A/B tests, whatever it is. let's prove that this actually is the thing before we spend a bunch of time wasting energy on it. And I'm a big believer that the reason startups work and the reason that they're able to grow so fast is not because startups are better at knowing what the market wants necessarily than big customers. It's because that they are forced to execute faster on what the market wants, which means they have less time for waste, right? And that's back to knowing what hypotheses and assumptions you want to prove is about reducing waste. So you're not spending 6 months like a big company might do, putting 100 people on a project that at the end of the day you realize people didn't necessarily want, but you had to do it because the CEO thought it was a good idea.
But there's also probably some balance to that. So if a startup founder is listening to the customer's feedback, but one customer who might be somewhat enterprisey say, I really want this,
right.
And you kind of all of a sudden start pivoting to that one customer's demands. All of a sudden you might be segmenting yourself away from customers that were part of you, and now we're like, okay, well, you're getting away from what we wanted.
Yeah,
so there's a balance act, right?
There absolutely is, and as part of those hypotheses or assumptions, like a core part of that is understanding your customer segmentation and prioritizing things accordingly. I'm on the board of a company recently that shifted its focus from a broad-based market segmentation into going all in on enterprise. And as part of that, they shifted their product roadmap, they shifted their sales strategy, they shifted a bunch of things, which 6 months ago, they were kind of trying to solve all those problems at once to a bunch of different customer segments. And we've now realized, hey, we're going to go fully after enterprise, which means we need to change some of our personnel, we need to change some of our product features, et cetera. But that was part of experimentation, and again, part of early stage startup is figuring that stuff out.
You talk about every day, someone in a company should take time to learn something new. Why is that so important?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that creating a learning culture starts at the individual level. It's not just a top-down thing. It's not just the CEO saying like, hey, let's be better at being learning oriented or being assumption oriented. I think that if every person in a company puts 15 minutes on their calendar every day and uses that time to find out one thing that they don't know about their product or business, it dramatically accelerates the ability of that company to learn. And so, that 15 minutes could be, I'm going to spend this amount of time today in Google Analytics, like looking up something about our conversion funnel, or it could be, I'm going to spend this amount of time today asking 3 extra questions in the customer calls that I already do. Or when if I'm in customer support, when I get inbound customer inquiries, I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time asking them 1 or 2 extra questions in email just to learn something from them. And as part of doing that, you're just collecting data and information about your business. It's kind of the everyone should be a product manager to some extent, at least in terms of learning about their business and learning about their customer base. And then I also believe that so that's just at a daily basis, individual level, individual contributor level. And then I also believe that every company on a weekly basis should have at least one thing that as a company, as part of their weekly sprint planning or whatever they're doing, that as a company they want to learn. And if they do that, very quickly you will find that as an entire company, you quickly have a backlog of things you want to learn that are beyond what you can execute on this week, and that kind of becomes your learning roadmap, for lack of a better thing, and it actually helps guide you toward a learning mentality.
We're coming close to the end here, so what are some of the things that, as startups, especially like in a young community like Buffalo, they're trying to figure things out. What's kind of that piece of advice that you have for any startup kind of developing, that learning roadmap, as you said?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is get out of the office, right? So get out of the office and go
gladly. Anytime I can get out of the office.
Go talk to customers, and that may mean going to talk to customers in totally different markets, right? Yeah. Depending on where you're targeting, it might mean making sure you're talking to people that are diverse and different from you, different age groups, different genders, different ethnicities, whatever it is, and going out and actually learning what it takes for people who are the kind of customers you're targeting to use your product, and actually meeting with them face to face and learning. That's the biggest thing, I think, at an early stage, especially as in an emerging ecosystem.
Well, Cody, thanks for joining me this week on the podcast. I know you got to get ready for the workshop here, so I'm cognizant of time. If folks want to learn more about you or somehow connect, how can they do that?
Sure. So I write on the web at medium.com/@Cody. My Twitter is @Cody Simms, and I'm just Cody at Techstars.com if anyone wants to hit me up.
Well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you again in Buffalo soon down the road.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers. I want to thank Cody for joining me on the podcast this week. You can connect with him on LinkedIn or through the Techstars website. And I just wanted to remind everyone again, Monday, April 29th, 5:30 p.m. here at the Innovation Center, 640 Ellicott Street, downtown Buffalo. We are doing a live episode of the podcast, Latitude 100, we're calling it, because it's the 100th episode of the podcast. This has been a great project that I've done here at 43 North. I'm thrilled to have gotten to this milestone. We've had some fantastic conversations. I don't want to single any particular episodes out because it wouldn't do justice to all the great guests we've had on the show. We've had well over 85 guests. We've had some repeat guests throughout the 2 years we've been doing this show. And I'm just thrilled with the stories we've been able to tell of the Buffalo startup ecosystem. And here's to the next 100. So join us Monday, April 29th, 5:30 p.m. here at DIG, 640 Ellicott Street, downtown Buffalo, for Latitude 100 with Joe and Dan from ACV Auctions. Make sure you leave a review of this podcast on iTunes, 5 stars preferably. The more people who review the show, the higher our ranking will be in iTunes, and that's a good thing for everybody. For 43 North, I'm Nate Benson, and we'll see you at Latitude 100 on Monday, April 29th.